Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm be painting up Iron Maiden's legendary mascot Eddie in his trooper style from the Iron Maiden set for the game Zombicide. The first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now the first colour I'm coming in with is MacLeod blue. I'm going to use this to paint his trousers and some of the details on the Union Jack flag as well. So for this I'm just picking out all over his trousers, trying to be careful around the other details, but it doesn't matter if I get a little bit of blue over other things, as I'll be coming back in later and painting these with other colours. I'm just going to make sure I pick out all of his trousers. And I'm also going to paint all of the flag at this stage with MacLeod blue. Obviously we'll be coming in later painting different parts, different colours. But at this stage, I'm just going to coat all of the flag with a couple of layers of MacLeod blue. I'm also picking out his backpack here with some MacLeod blue as well. That's the colour that he's got on the album covers, and it will give us a nice contrast to the other colours later. So after a couple of layers of MacLeod blue, you can see we've built up to a nice solid colour all over those details. The next thing I'm going to paint is going to be his jacket. For this, I'm coming in with Mephiston red. I'm going to very carefully pick out all of the details to his jacket. I'm going to try and not get this over any details that are going to be skin later. So I'm going to pick out all of the visible parts to his jacket with a couple of layers of Mephiston red. See, there's lots of straps and things getting in the way of his jacket. Just make sure you coat all of it with some Mephiston red so we get a nice solid colour. Be really careful around details like the backpack and things. Just catching that jacket with a couple of layers of Mephiston red. And at this stage I'm also going to pick out across the St George with some Mephiston red as well. So it's that part here in the middle of the flag, making sure I pick out all of this with some Mephiston red. Finally, he's got these lines going down the sides of his trousers for that classic uniform. So I'm just catching these with some Mephiston red as well. Being really careful around the blue. And with all of that Mephiston red applied, it's really added a pop of colour to the model, giving him that classic British red jacket look. So next I'm coming in with some Celestra Grey. And for this, I'm going to paint the little bit of trim that's on his uniform, so on his epaulettes here. Just picking this out with some Celestra Grey. And I'm going to very carefully sink this into the recesses around the red cross on the Union Jack. Trying not to get any of the other colours, but if I do, I can come back and touch them up. I'm sinking a little bit of Celestra Grey into this recess to finish off the Union flag. And luckily these are sculpted in, so it's nice and easy to keep them a consistent width. Just make sure you apply a little bit of Celestra Grey into this recess on the flag. And with that Celestra Grey applied, that is the flag finished off and the epaulettes picked out. The next thing I'm going to paint is the flagpole. For this I'm coming in with some Zandri dust. just going to very carefully apply this all over the pole to the flag. So I don't want to get this over the little bits of blue we've already painted holding the flag on, or the skin we'll be painting later. Just make sure you pick out all the flagpole with some Xandri dust. So this Xandri dust will give us a really nice light colour to this pole, which will look really nice once we've shaded and highlighted it. With the flagpole painted, it's added that pop of bright colour to the model. Next thing I'm going to paint is all the skin and the straps to the model. For this, I'm using Rawk flesh. I'm going to carefully pick out all of the details of skin. That's going to be the face and the hands. He's also got a hole showing on his shoulder through his jacket as well. So I'm going to make sure I pick out all of the exposed skin. And I'm going to pick out any of these straps and pouches on his jacket. So very carefully picking these out. There are quite a few of them. So really take your time, work your way around the model, and pick out any of these straps and pouches on the model. He's got several pouches down by his waist, so I'm just applying a couple of layers to these till we get a nice solid coat all over these details. Finally, at this stage as well, he's got these parts here at the top of his boots to add some contrast to the lower part of the model and brighten up some of these details. That Xandri dust applied, you can see how it's really brightened up some of these details on the model and picked out a lot of those details. So now with some Avalan Sunset, I'm just going to pick out the rank markings. So he's got these ones here on his lower arm that's holding the flag. Carefully picking these out with some Avalan Sunset. And he's also got ones here on his shoulder of his sword hand. So I'm just making sure I pick these out with some Avalan Sunset. That is his rank marking picked out. So the next thing I'm going to do is paint his boots. For this, I'm using Corvus Black. Going to carefully pick out all the details on his boots, avoiding the areas we painted with Rawk flesh. Just making sure I pick out all of the boot details with some Corvus Black, and I'm also going to pick out his scabbard here with some Corvus Black as well. With the Corvus Black applied, all that's left to do now is to paint the metallic details. To start with, for these, I'm coming in with Lead Belcher. Using this, I'm carefully going to pick out his sword. From the top to the flagpole, this spike here, I'm picking these out with a couple of layers of Lead Belcher. Now there's just one final colour left to apply as a base coat, and that's going to be to pick out any of the gold details. So for the gold, I'm going to use Retributor Armour. I'm going to very carefully apply this to any details that I want to be gold. So I'm going to do the handle to his sword here. Carefully picking this out with a couple of layers of the Retributor Armour. Also details like the bottom of the scabbard And I've also picked out any of the small buckles that are on the model as well. But with that Retributor armor applied, that is all of the base coats painted on the model. So now it's time to start shading. First shade I'm going to come in with is Reichland Flesh Shade. I'm just going to apply this over the areas of skin. So being careful not to get this anywhere else. This is the first of 2 shades I'm going to apply to the skin to give it that zombie ghoul-like appearance that Eddie has. And now with some Agrax Earth Shade, I'm going to apply this over the flagpole and any of the gold details. By doing this now, it lets that Reichland Flesh Shade dry on the skin, so we can come back with another colour later. Just pick out all of the gold and that flagpole with some Agrax Earth Shade, and with some Known Oil, it's going to be everything else. So all of the Lead Belcher, all over the flag as well, letting it sink into those recesses, and obviously all of the jacket, all of the trousers. I want to catch all of these with some Known Oil. You don't want this to pull too heavily in any of the recesses. If you do notice it's pulling, make sure you wick it away with a dry brush. Just make sure you shade all of the rest of the details with some Known Oil. By this stage, the Reichland Flesh Shade should have dried. So now I'm coming in with some Athonian Camo Shade. I'm going to shade this over the Reichland Flesh Shade. The 2 colours will work really well together to give a zombie ghoul-like appearance to the skin.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below.
And after those shades have dried, you can see they've added definition all over the model. So now it's time to start highlighting. First thing I'm going to highlight is the skin. For this, I'm coming in with some Flayed One Flesh. I'm just going to apply this to the most raised and prominent details on the skin. So areas like his eyebrows, his lips, his nose, things like that. I'm just coming in with a little bit of Flayed One Flesh, picking out the most raised details, giving them a very small edge highlight with Flayed One Flesh. The shade has done most of the work for us on this skin, so I'm just using this as a highlight on the sharpest points to add a little bit of interest and just to up that definition on certain points of his skin. With that Flayed One Flesh applied, that is the skin highlighted. But next up I am going to paint the eyes, so all of the face is finished. So for this, I'm coming with Abaddon Black first. I'm going to sink just a little bit of Abaddon Black into those recesses of the eye sockets. Be nice and careful around all the skin, just getting it into those recesses, catching them with a little bit of Abaddon Black. Now with some White Scar, I'm going to very carefully just apply a small spot in each eye. This will give those dead zombie-like eye appearance. And that's the eyes painted on the model. So the next step, I'm going to paint his teeth, and this will just finish off the face. So for the teeth, I'm coming in with Screaming Skull. I'm going to very carefully pick out any of the teeth we see sculpted into the model with a small spot of Screaming Skull. By leaving the shade in the recess, it creates definition to those teeth. With the teeth picked out, that is the face painted. So the next step is I'm going to start highlighting all of the areas of blue. For this, I'm coming in with MacLeod blue first. I'm going to paint this onto all of the areas of the model that the shade didn't settle. So wherever that the shade settled into a recess, I'm leaving that in those recesses, but coming in on either side with some MacLeod blue to bring these areas back up to their original colour. Areas here like the backpack, you can see where all the shades settled into all of those creases. So I'm leaving that and coming in on either side with some MacLeod blue just to bring it back up to its original colour. I'm doing much the same here on the flag, finding areas that the shade settled, leaving the null oil in those recesses, but brightening the rest of the blue back up with some MacLeod blue. With that MacLeod blue applied, you can see how it's brightened up those areas of blue. Now I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of MacLeod blue and Altdorf guard blue. And for this step, I'm just applying it in the middle of all the areas we just applied our previous step. So I want to leave a little bit of pure MacLeod blue showing through on the edges, but applying a bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the MacLeod blue. Doing much the same on the flag. Wherever there was a little bit of MacLeod blue, applying a bit of this mix into the middle of all those areas, also focusing it towards the edges and highest points as well. Build up to a nice smooth transition towards our highlights. With that mix applied, you can see it's really starting to brighten up those areas of blue on the model. Now I'm coming in with some pure Altdorf guard blue, and much like with the mix, I'm applying this into the middle of the areas we just applied our previous step. So keeping these nice and small, allowing some of the previous layers to show through. I'm just applying a little bit of pure Altdorf guard blue in the middle of all the areas we just applied the pure Altdorf guard blue. Some of these can be some very small spots, small details, with just applying a little bit of pure Altdorf guard blue too. Just really focusing it towards the highest points and sharpest edges. It's much the same here on the flag, focusing it towards those edges and highest points, just applying a little bit of Altdorf guard blue in the middle of all the areas we applied our previous step. With that Altdorf guard blue applied, you can see it's brightened up all those areas of blue. We've got a nice smooth transition up to our brighter colours. Now I'm just coming in with some Calgar blue. For this, I'm just going to apply an edge highlight to all the sharpest details, most prominent folds and creases. Just going to catch all of these with a really thin edge highlight of Calgar blue. So you don't need to apply this all over the model, but just wherever you've got a sharp edge or a prominent fold, I'm just catching the very edges with a thin edge highlight of Calgar blue. This will just give the appearance of light catching those sharpest details and most prominent folds. I'm doing much the same here on the flag. I'm also going to catch the outer edge with an edge highlight of Calgar blue to really make that flag stand out and add some interest to the model. Just all the most raised detail, sharpest edges, just catching all of these with a little bit of Calgar blue. And with that edge highlight applied, you can see it's really made that blue stand out, added interest all over those details. So now it's time to start highlighting the red. So for the red, coming in with some Mephiston red first, much like we did with the blue. Wherever the known oil settled in a recess, I'm leaving that in those recesses and coming in on all the other areas and brightening it back up with some Mephiston red. So really take your time at this stage, working with some small details on the red. Just make sure you leave the known oil showing in the recesses. Brighten the rest of it back up with some Mephiston red. I'm also doing the same to the red areas of the uni and jack. So where the known oil's sitting in a recess, I'm leaving that but highlighting the rest of it back up with some Mephiston red. Mephiston red applied, you can see it's brought those areas of red back up to their original colour. So now with a 50-50 mix of Mephiston red and Evil Sun Scarlet, and once again focusing this into the middle of all the areas we just applied the pure Mephiston red. Focusing it towards highest points, most raised details and sharpest edges, but putting just a little bit of this mix in the middle of all of the areas that we just applied the pure Mephiston red. During this process, it does build up those nice smooth transitions from the darkest colours to the brightest highlights. It just takes a little bit of time. Make sure you keep each paint nice and thin so it allows some of the other layers to show through. This is what gives us smooth transitions rather than pure solid bands of colour. 50-50 mix applied. You can see how it's starting to brighten up those details. So the next thing, I'm coming in with some pure Evil Sun Scarlet. And I'm going to apply this once again in the middle of all the areas we just applied the previous layer. As you can see, I'm using a nice small brush because these are going to be quite small areas that I'm applying this. Just want to focus a little bit of pure Evil Sun Scarlet into the middle of all of those previous areas, but really focusing it towards those highest points and sharpest folds. Just catching all of these details with a little bit of Evil Sun Scarlet. On the flag here you can see it's some very small details. I'm just catching with a little bit of Evil Sun Scarlet as a highlight. With the Evil Sun Scarlet applied, the jacket's really got some definition on it now. There's just one final edge highlight to apply. And that's going to be with some Wild Rider red. Just going to very carefully apply an edge highlight to all the sharpest details. So it's going to be the very bottom of the jacket here, and the tops of all of the creases and folds. Just catching all of these with a really thin edge highlight of Wild Rider red. Flag, just any of these sharpest points, the very edge of all the details, just catching them with a thin edge highlight of Wild Rider red. With that Wild Rider red applied, there's all of the red details highlighted. You can see it's really adding colour to the model, making it pop. So now I'm coming in with some white scar, and for this I'm just going to highlight the white details on the flag. So much like we've been doing with the edge highlights and the other details, the sharpest points, the very edges, I'm just catching these with a small spot of white scar. So there's not a lot of detail here, we're working with some very small areas. So just apply some small spots of white scar to all the sharpest points of the white details on the flag. With that white scar applied, that is all of the flag highlighted. It's looking fantastic now. So next I'm coming in with some Ushabti bone. I'm going to use this to highlight the flagpole. Just going to apply this as a light dry brush all over the flagpole, being really careful around all of the other details, just catching the flagpole with a very light dry brush of Ushabti bone. With that dry brush applied, that is the flagpole highlighted. So next thing I'm going to work on are highlighting the straps. First step for this, I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of Rawk flesh and deepkin flesh. For this I'm applying it wherever the shade didn't settle. So where we've got that darkened down pure Rawk flesh in all of the recesses, I'm coming in on either side of that and applying a bit of this mix onto all of the larger flatter areas to brighten them up, but leaving that shade showing in all the recesses. So on some of the pouches here, it's going to be quite large areas. But make sure wherever the shade has settled, I'm leaving that as the darker colour. I'm applying a little bit of this mix on all the flatter, lighter areas that the shade didn't settle. Make sure you do the same to these parts of the boots as well, leaving that Nuln Oil in all of the recesses, but brightening up the larger flatter areas with some of this mix. And with that mix applied, you can see how it's really brightened up those details of strapping. So next I'm coming in with some pure deepkin flesh. I'm going to apply this into the middle of all of the areas that we just applied the previous layer. So we applied a bit of that Rawk flesh, deepkin flesh mix. I'm coming in the centre of all of those areas, applying a really thin layer of pure deepkin flesh. There's some of these details going to be really small areas we're applying this, so just be nice and careful. Use a brush with a good tip. Just paint a little bit of pure deepkin flesh into the middle of all the areas we just applied that previous mix. See here on the boots, doing much the same, focusing onto the tops of those folds and creases, but leaving all the previous colours showing through. With that pure deepkin flesh applied, there's just one final step to apply to highlight all of these details on the model, and that's going to be with some pure white scar. I'm going to come in and just apply an edge highlight of white scar to all of these details. So the edges of all the straps, I'm picking these out with a thin edge highlight of white scar. We don't want these to read as pure white, so that's why it's just a fine edge highlight of white scar. I want them to be that sort of dark colour on the artwork to the Iron Maiden Trooper album. But just make sure you come through and apply a little bit of white scar as an edge highlight to all of these details. That white scar applied, you can see it's brightened up all of those areas of strapping and those light details. So now it's time to highlight his rank markings. For this I'm coming in with Uriel Yellow. Just going to very carefully paint a line in the middle for those markings, so that will be the highest point. Just picking this out with a thin edge highlight of Uriel Yellow. Rank markings applied, the model's really starting to come together now. So next thing I'm going to highlight are the areas of black. For this I'm using Mechanica Standard Grey. Just going to very carefully apply an edge highlight to all the areas of black, so it's things like the tips of his boots, the laces, any prominent folds or creases on his boots catching these with a thin edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm also going to apply this going down his scabbard as well. Just going to carefully pick out the very edge with a thin line of Mechanica Standard Grey. With those boots and scabbard highlighted, there's only a couple of details left to highlight on Eddie now. For the first of these with Stormhose Silver, I'm going to pick out all of the areas we paint with Lead Belcher with a thin edge highlight of Stormhose Silver. So I'm catching the very sharpest edges to his sword and any sharp prominent details on the spike on the top of the flagpole. There's just one final highlight left to apply to the model. That's going to be to highlight the gold. For the gold, I'm using Liberator Gold. Much like with the Lead Belcher, I'm just going to carefully apply an edge highlight to all of the areas that we painted with Retributor armour. So be really careful, just pick out the very sharpest points of all of these details with some Liberator Gold. And with that highlight applied, that is how to paint the Zombicide version of Eddie from the Iron Maiden album, The Trooper. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, what's your favourite Iron Maiden album? And also, are there any other famous heavy metal mascots you would like to see me paint? Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And happy painting!